all those burning questions that you had, all those burning questions you've had about what it means to be a yoga professional and how to grow and operate at best practices. I probably have most of the answers for the questions that you have, so I'm really excited about that. One thing I want to share just as we get started here, and then I'm going to talk about our law firm and a little bit about what we do and just set the context for this webinar to make sure that we can answer all the questions. We have a free checklist that we provide to anyone who's a yoga professional who might have more questions. So the reason why we came up with this checklist is I've done all these, like I've done webinars for years, and it's very common that I will hear from people like, well, tell me if this lands for you. If you think like when it comes to the law, you don't know what you don't know. Give me like a hands up if that makes sense. You're like, I really have no idea what any of this is about. Cool. Well, then the checklist will be helpful for you because it sort of sets the map about what things you need to be aware of and a little bit about what direction to go in. So very quickly about myself, I'm a lawyer. I started a law firm called Conscious Counsel 5 years ago. We work mostly with yoga professionals and fitness and health and wellness professionals. And the reason why, does anybody want to guess why I started a law firm to work with yoga professionals? You can just unmute and chime in. Any guess? Paolo, I feel like you've got a good idea, man.
I suspect you had a lot of claims.
Adrienne, that's it. No, I had 0 clients when I started, but I'm happy we got
No,
a
not
guess.
claims.
Claims. No, I had 0 claims also. But I wanted to travel the world and go to different yoga studios in all these different countries. So I was like, how can I make doing yoga a business expense without opening a studio myself? And so I was like, why don't I just be a lawyer and then everything can be market research, right? And I'm happy to say 5 years later, the journey continues and I'm still doing yoga all over the world, which brings me a lot of joy. But more from a service perspective, the cool thing about being a lawyer who works with yoga professionals is that we get to really understand how this particular industry operates. And the great thing for anyone who put up their hand when I asked, you know, you don't know what you don't know. The great news is that whatever you're going through, we've already been through it with one of our clients. We've got hundreds of clients all over the world, and we try to get to people before they make mistakes and before it becomes like a really big problem. And instead just being proactive and coming up with solutions right off the bat. So that's a little bit about me and why I started this firm. We practice something called heart leading law. We also make law fun, as you can see, but heart leading law means like you can be a lawyer and a real person at the same time, right? So as a small business owner, hopefully you have a lawyer and hopefully you have an accountant, right? And in working with those two people, you can understand, okay, well, this is how I organize my money and I allocate money for taxes. And this is how I make sure that I'm protected and I get sued and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I think that should be fun. And I basically, before I became a lawyer, I had dealt with lawyers and it was always painful and awful and terrible. And I was like, someone can do this better, right? Like just naturally, I thought that someone might be able to help. So that's a little bit about me and about our law firm. The one thing I want to say before I sort of dive into this is, and this is really important, okay? The point of doing this webinar is to provide practical information for all of you. So if you have a question, will you promise me if you have a question that you will ask the question? You will not be ashamed or embarrassed or nothing, whatever. It's like, you'll just ask a question if it comes up. Can we make that promise to each other? And I promise to ask about, I may go into more details about the snacks that you guys have been eating. Is anyone eating a snack at this moment? Like you have a snack in front of you as we're doing this? Yeah, okay. Adrienne's got, anyone else? Machteld Van Imp has, that's amazing. I feel like Lorena's on tea. Okay, well, I've provided an opportunity for everyone to have a snack. For me, life is better when food is involved. So that's that. And I had 2 chocolate chip cookies today because I felt like it. I'm not going to pick on Raminta, but I am curious, Raminta, like what snacks do they have in Greenland?
All kind of dried fish, all kind of, and whale skin, which I'm not eating, and like that. All what's living in the sea, and dried reindeer and smoked reindeer, like, yeah.
Okay, guys, I feel like the next time that we do this, I'll bring the whale skin and the reindeer and the and the dried fish. So that's really cool. I'm sorry. I am naturally intrigued by this. Okay, so I'm going to get started here and sort of jump in. But remember, at any point you can stop me and you can ask any questions. Now, the first thing that I want to explain, right? Law is a very big topic, and it's something that a lot of us don't have experience with. So I just want to spend about like 10 or 15 minutes talking about how the legal world actually operates and how things work on a day-to-day basis, right? And then specifically, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to talk about waivers of liability, and I'm going to talk about service agreements and what specifics should be included around that. And at any point, if you have any questions, you can just let me know. And of course, I'm going to be happy to answer. But the reason why I always take time to explain how the law actually works is because I find there's a very big difference between people's perception of law and how and what it's like being a yoga lawyer on a day-to-day basis. And the more that you can understand how the law actually works on a day-to-day basis, I think, like for me, in terms of giving you practical, applicable outcomes, that's going to be more beneficial to you. Like if I can explain to you how things actually work. So that's sort of what I'm going to start with. Thumbs up if we're still awake. I only see one person taking a nap. So like if we're talking about law and only one person sleeping so far, then we're doing great. Okay, so the biggest thing that you have to know about how the law relates to business for either yoga teachers or yoga studio owners, online or in person, is that all of it revolves around communication. And the most important thing that you can do for your business is to have documents that communicate the expectations you have in relationships openly and honestly. So I'll repeat those words again. Documents that communicate the expectations that you have in relationships openly and honestly. And you might think like, oh, that has nothing to do with law. Does anybody watch Suits or watch any other shows that are like Suits? Right? If you watch legal drama shows, you think law is about like the expert evidence at the last second that comes in. But really, what I've learned of doing this for 5 years with hundreds of clients is that the best way to proactively avoid legal issues is by having documents that communicate your expectations openly and honestly. So as long as you have that written on a piece of paper somewhere, communicate expectations openly and honestly in relationships, we're in a great start. Now, in that same sense of overwhelm or uncertainty or something that you may not understand about the law, we're going to play a really easy game. And if you have a pen and paper, we can do it together. So what I want you to do is to write the name of your business in the middle of the piece of paper. So for me, I would write Conscious Counsel. For you, you can write whatever, if it's just you operating or whatever it is, you write it in the middle of the piece of paper. Then you draw a line to all of the different relationships that you have in that business, right? So you probably have clients. So you have yoga students who you're working with. Maybe you're a teacher who works at a studio. So that would be another relationship that you have. Maybe you own a studio and you have teachers who work for you. So then contractors or employees would be another relationship. Maybe you rent a space. So you would have a landlord or a rental agreement. And maybe you have a business partner. So you would put that relationship down. So I'll give everyone just like 15 seconds. You can write down the different relationships that you have. Okay, awesome. So now to to tie in the first thing I said with this idea of understanding the relationships is the goal of how you can get to best legal practices is for each of those relationships having written documentation, like a written agreement that communicates your expectations openly and honestly for each of those relationships. So with law, like the relationship with your clients is usually governed by something called a service agreement or a membership agreement. You get everyone to sign a waiver of liability. If you have teachers, it would be a contract or an employment agreement. For everything that you do online, it would be privacy policy or a terms of service. But really, by having documentation for each relationship, you're in the best position to succeed. So now you might be thinking like, okay, well, why does it matter that I have these documents and why should I communicate expectations openly and honestly? There's two reasons for that. One is like, and I'm not a therapist or a psychologist at all. I'm a lawyer, but you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, how much of the job involves listening and, sort of being a therapist to hear about people and the different relationships that they have. And the most common thread that I've deduced from all of the client interactions that I've been a part of are that problems will always come up when there was a non-communicated or miscommunicated expectation. So I thought that you were going to do this, or I was expecting that you were going to do this. It didn't happen. Now that has propelled into a big problem. And now I'm suing you, or now I want a discount, or now I'm going to defame you on social media, or whatever other things that I work with. So the real simple principle, and this is more of like a feel-good relationship point, less legal, but in a very practical sense, if you are able to tell people before they start working with you, what they can expect and how things are going to work, and if things aren't working, what's going to happen next, then you'll be in a position to succeed. Because again, most of the problems that I have to resolve when it escalates from being, a problem into an issue or a legal issue has to do around some form of misalignment around the communication. So that's first and foremost, just like general rule of thought, rule for all relationships is like, as best as possible, communicate expectations openly and honestly. Now, the legal part of having it written down, the function is really as follows, okay? Let's say a problem comes up. So someone gets injured, or someone is hurt or disappointed or wants a refund, or whatever it is, for whatever reason, someone's upset at you, and now they want something from you. And now I'm going to explain how like the legal process actually works for yoga professionals, okay? Typically, this is what will happen. Someone will be upset. They will then either write you an email to tell you that they're upset and how you are responsible to make everything fine for them again, or they will hire a lawyer who will send you an email and tell you how you can fix the problem and how much it's going to cost you and how everything you've done for your whole life is wrong, and that you have to pay tens of thousands of euros or whatever it is. Now, the biggest thing to understand at law is that it's not about getting sued and it's not about going to court, because before anyone will file a claim against someone else, there will always be some form of negotiation phase at the start. And this is where having the documents come in is so helpful and so important. But basically, someone's going to say they were injured or they were hurt or they were disappointed or something bad happened. At this point, there's two junctures of how things can go. And remember, all of this comes from my experience of working with clients. I've done this for years. This is the one thing that I do, so I always know how it happens. Someone's going to be upset or disappointed or injured or hurt. Now, there's two ways that it can go. One of the ways is that you have the proper documentation in place. You have documents specific to you and your business. They cover the type of relationship that you want to have or that you said that you were going to have. And as a result of that, you are able to respond from a place of power and from a place of control, where you're in control of the situation. So let's run through a scenario. Someone gets injured. You do a yoga class. Let's say it's online, it's Zoom classes, and this person didn't have their camera on. You can't really see what's going on. And they end up getting injured and hurt. And they say, okay, well, it's your fault, Cory, because you were leading this class and you weren't supervising me, or we tried a new pose, or like whatever excuse you could think of. I've heard of it. I've been a part of all of this. and then now they're going to hold me responsible, right? If I have a good waiver of liability specific to my business and what I do and the way that I provide services, where I let people know what the risks are and how those risks can materialize, I'm going to receive that letter either from the lawyer or from the person, and I can respond from a place of power and say, I'm heartbroken that I'm so sad that you're injured. I'm really sorry that happened. Safety is a priority in my classes. However, before we agreed to work together, you signed this waiver of liability where I told you that we would be doing Zoom classes online. You understood that there was a risk that you could get injured by operating on your, by practicing on your own in an unsupervised space. And you decided to legally release me from all legal responsibility and not hold me accountable. Therefore, at law, you have no position against me. And, I wish you the best of luck and I hope you get well soon. That's the one way you can go when you have documents that are specific to you and your business. Thumbs up if that makes sense. And it sort of sounds great for things to work out that way. And as a lawyer, I love when things work out that way. And I love setting my clients up to succeed like that. Alternatively, the other way that things can go, and this is like the less fun, even though law is fun, this is the less fun way for things to happen, is when a similar issue arises, but someone downloaded a waiver from the internet or copied an agreement or was using something that was not specific to them and their business. And in that case, same thing happens. You get the email, you get the complaint, and then you have to respond. But then when you have to respond and you don't have the legal documents to support your position, you cannot respond with the same power and with the same authority and with the same certainty and confidence to say, hey, I told you we were going to do this and you agreed and all of those sorts of things. And instead what you're doing is you're responding and it's coming from a place of like, hey, you signed this general waiver that said we would be doing yoga together. And I can tell you, like, people can always sense this. They can, in addition to knowing, because you can show specifically, like, you agreed to this. If anytime I draft a response where we don't have documents that support our legal position, what it does is it adds fuel to the fire and it gives momentum to the person who's making a claim against you. And it's not like I'm not talking about rocket science here. I'm not talking about like super complex, in-depth agreements. I'm just talking about things specific to you and your business. But as a general principle, when you are unable to respond initially with a strong legal position, it's like you're going 2 steps backwards and you're giving the other person more momentum. They realize you don't have the documentation in place. Then they either go find a lawyer who really puts more pressure on you, or if it's a lawyer who's in charge of that file, they're going to say, full steam ahead, let's go. They don't have a legal position. We can negotiate a higher settlement, or we could even threaten to take this to court. Because, and I'll just take a minute here to explain what legal position is. Basically, something happens and each side is going to make an argument about what their legal position is and why they are right. And because actually getting to court is so expensive and such a long process, every time that I've been involved with it, it always gets resolved in a settlement. So person A says 25,000 euros, business Yogi X says, 3,000 euros, and we end up at 11, and that's it. But it's the strength of your legal position will determine how you can negotiate around that settlement or problem. And like this can extend to things like, intellectual property rights with employees or contractors, or keeping membership money from clients and service agreements. It applies to every different area. And so what I'm just trying to explain to you, and what the concept I'm trying to get across, and I'll open it up to any questions right now, but it's really the importance of having documents, make sure that you're protected so that in the event something happens or there's a problem, you'll be in a position to powerfully and respond from a place of control. Because there's 2 ways to practice law. You can practice proactively or you can practice reactively. Proactively means before there was a problem, you set everything up properly, and now if something happens, you're going to be okay because you're in control. Or reactively is like, I didn't want to spend $3,000 to set my business up properly and protect my liability. Now a problem's coming and 3,000 is turned into 13,000 and it goes from there. So I'll just pause for a moment and like see if anybody has any questions or comments or wants to share anything. It's so crystal clear that no one has any questions whatsoever. Okay, thank you, Yeli. Yeli Riva Staley says this is very good, very helpful. Okay, cool. But like, just give me a thumbs up so I know we're alive because no one's speaking except Carrie came off mute.
Yeah, I'm
so
going to say
Carrie,
something.
let's do it.
So for us, we have an online yoga studio and we just have teachers that teach by the hour. So we don't have any employment contracts or anything like that in place because we believe like we're not employing these people. We don't offer them like a job. We just do like 0 hour kind of like they're freelancers essentially. And I think when you have an online company, like maybe not that we take it less seriously, but we don't really know what our rights are. Like we'd love to have them sign a contract to protect us for different areas and things like this, but maybe we don't believe that we have the right or something. So this kind of support and advice would be really helpful to show us like as an online company, what can we expect from like smaller relationships? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So Carrie, I'd love to dive. So let me just make sure that I got that correct. So you're an online studio and you have teachers that you pay by the hour and you don't have agreements with them and you're not sure if you need to have agreements or you'd like to, but you don't know if that's asking too much.
Exactly. Like, yeah.
Okay, well, remember, so if you did the exercise where you wrote the different relationships that you have down, you as a business will benefit by communicating expectations openly and honestly, because you will be letting people know, hey, we're working together. You may only work 3 hours a week, but this is what it looks like. And this is what we're expecting from you. Show up on time, do X, Y, or Z, talk about our brand in this way, whatever it is that you want. So remember that having a legally binding agreement where you share your expectations with someone does not have to be, you're not asking too much of them or you're not asserting your position by letting someone know like, hey, this is what you can expect from us and this is what we can expect from you, just generally speaking outside of the law. But from a legal standpoint, if you are paying someone and they are an independent contractor, you should have an agreement and you are allowed to assert your rights and ask things from them in the relationship. So don't feel like, oh, if we're a smaller studio or if we're just online or if it's people, teachers are only working 2 hours a week, we're not allowed to ask. No, of course you can. And so I'll share with you a maxim that I learned early in my career, and that's 2 parties can agree to anything that is not illegal. That's like a general rule at law. 2 parties can agree to anything that is not illegal. So if you in your online studio feel more comfortable by having your teacher sign something where you say, hey, you're going to show up 5 minutes early. We want you to send a follow-up email to participants, this, that, or the other. The other thing that you would want to think about would be intellectual property if you record any of the videos of what you're making, and that's a whole other story. But you are, as so long as what you are agreeing to is not illegal, you can ask people to sign anything and you can tell people to sign anything, and there shouldn't be any, it doesn't matter the size of your business. If you are working with someone, even on a volunteer basis, you're permitted to have an agreement. Is that helpful? Okay, cool. We got 2 thumbs up. Anybody else as we keep going? Okay, Brandy, what's up? So what if we offer classes virtually and in person, but we need to have 2 separate agreements for yogis to sign? Brandy, it's almost like you and I planned this together, because this is like, it's the perfect transition of going into waivers of liability. So, I want to talk about waivers because it's a really important document, and I want everyone to understand like where waivers come from and why they're important. And the one thing that I'll just share, Brandy, is that you remember, two parties can agree to anything that's not illegal. And the whole purpose of the document is to communicate your expectations openly and honestly. So what we do at Conscious Counsel is you get one agreement and it's specific to you and your business. So it would be like, okay, if we are doing things online, then A, B, C, D. If we are doing things in person, then A, B, C, D, this, that, or the other. So it's a really easy solution. But now I'm going to take it and I'm going to plug it into waivers of liability, right? So basically, the way that it works at law is when you are facilitating an activity for another person, you have a responsibility to make sure that they do not get hurt by participating in that activity with you, right? Does that make sense to everyone? So if you and I are two strangers and there's no relationship between us, and you do something crazy or you do something weird, a weird yoga position in the park, and I'm walking along, I have no responsibility to make sure that you're okay. However, once I am your teacher and you are my student, and I am going to be facilitating and guiding you through the practice of yoga, the law says, okay, well, Cory, if you're going to be teaching someone and making sure, and doing this, facilitating this experience for someone, you have a responsibility to make sure they do not get injured by virtue of their participation. Now, as you know, especially in the United States, but around the whole world, that creates a very litigious situation, especially in Greenland. Just watch out for those Greenland lawyers. They are sharks, literally. They're sharks. But in all seriousness, what happens is it became too big of a risk for business owners to do anything because they're responsible and they're liable for the participation of everyone who's taking part of the activities. So then the court said, okay, well, what we're actually going to do is, yes, if you are the teacher, you are legally responsible, but so long as you let people know the specifics of what you're doing and what the activities are and what equipment you use and what the risks are and how those risks can materialize, you forthrightly share all of that information with someone and they still choose to participate in the activity, then you will not be held legally responsible. And so that's the framing of a waiver is that. It's that normally you would be legally responsible, but you can get people to sign a document which says, okay, I'm not holding Cory responsible because he's told me specifically what we're doing, and then and I'm going to go into the 5 elements of a waiver of liability in a second. But this is also a really important juncture to understand why it has to be specific to you and your business. Because some of the biggest problems that I'll fix for clients is that they have a waiver that they downloaded or they got from their cousin or whatever it is, like however they got this document. And they're like, oh, great. Well, I got this waiver, so I'm going to use it and everyone's going to sign it. And I'll read it. There'll be a problem. Someone will get hurt. I'll read the waiver. I'm like, yeah, but this isn't specific to anything that you're doing. And so the crux of a waiver is that it has to be specific to the types of activities and the types of services that you offer. And I'm going to tell you a story now. And all of this happened around 2020 when the world changed and we took everything online. So it happened with the first person who got injured in a client, my first client who had someone in their community get injured doing an online yoga class. And they didn't get the waiver from us and they copied it from somewhere and they had everyone sign it. Okay, great. The person gets injured doing online classes. Now they're asking for a certain amount of money to be compensated for their injuries. The client freaks out, calls me, he's crying, like, that's me wearing my therapist hat. I say, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. I got your back, right? The whole spiel of what I say every time. And then I say, show me the waiver. And they showed me the waiver and it didn't say anything about things being done online. So I responded on behalf of my client and I said, okay, well, you signed the waiver. And the client, the person making the complaint had one sentence. They're like, yes, I signed the waiver, but I never released you of liability for practicing online. And then it's like, remember the whole thing I said about legal position? Like at that point, yeah, that person is correct. And my client and the person who I was working for didn't have the right documentation. And as such, everything that I explained about how and why a waiver would work did not apply because you're right. This person was covered for practicing yoga, but not for practicing yoga online. And so with a waiver, it always comes down to the specifics around how you're doing it, where you're doing it, what equipment's being used. And like I've seen every excuse, I've seen people try to get out of waivers in every way possible. And that's why I'm such like, I spend all of this time really trying to drill into your minds in the most fun and easiest and happiest way that the waiver has to be specific to what you're doing. So I see that there are a couple comments in the chat. I'm going to come to them in a second. I just want everyone, if you've got a pen and a paper, there are 6 elements to a waiver of liability. So, and I just want you to write these down so that you can look at your waiver and make sure that it covers all of them. So the first is, what are the activities that you're doing? So are you just doing yoga? Are you doing yoga and Pilates? Are you doing aerial yoga? Are you doing Iyengar yoga with different, you know, all of the different things? What sort of yoga are you doing? And then also, what equipment are you using? This is like 1A. This is still part of the first one. So it's, what equipment do you use? And just so you know, again, I've had stories where people have got injured using equipment that was not included in the waiver of liability. And they say, okay, well, you're right. I agreed that I was going to practice yoga with you, but you didn't say anything about us using chairs in yoga, and I got injured with a chair. Therefore, I'm sure you can see how the logic follows. And in addition to equipment, it's what medium is being used. So the 3 major mediums is in-person, online, but then also on-demand classes. And on-demand classes have different risks, right? Because on demand, it's like, okay, I have no supervision over your space. I have no supervision if you're overextending yourself or practicing dangerously, and I can't be in control of any of that. So those are all part of the first one. I'll just repeat it. So it's, what activities are we doing? And then in addition to that, it's what equipment is being used and what different modalities are being used in the facilitation of the experiences. The second element is, what are the risks of doing this? So one is, these are the activities that we're doing. Number 2 is, what are the different risks of what could go wrong? So you could get injured, you could slip, you could fall, you could have cardiac challenges and I have one client who has a studio where, God for, tragically someone passed away in a class, and like, you never know when someone's going to pass away, but because it's so uncontrollable, but you never know when someone's gonna have a heart attack, but you want to make sure that you present these, the possibilities of these risks to someone, like, hey, this is what you're doing and these are the risks involved. So the second is the risk. The third is, what happens if the risk materializes, right? So let's say it could be broken bones, it could be cardiovascular issues, it could be, you could fall on your head if you're doing an inversion or something like that. So then what does that actually mean for life? It could mean, a significant change to quality of living. It could mean that you miss work. It could mean that, you have less enjoyment that you used to have. Whatever, it could mean death in very rare circumstances, but all of that needs to be included. So 1 is activities, 2 is what are the risks, and 3 is like, what happens if the risks materialize. Number 4 is voluntary participation. So like, hey, I've told you everything that we're doing, and you agree to voluntarily participate, which is really big, so that if someone's going to try to come back, you can say, well, we told you and you chose to do this, understanding the risks. Number 5 is affirmation of health. So someone affirming that they are healthy enough. Hey, you've told me what we're doing and all the ways we're doing it and what equipment we're using, and I affirm that I'm healthy enough to participate. If I have any doubts, it is my responsibility to make sure that I deal with them. And then number 6 is ultimately the release of liability. So like, you've told me everything. I know the risks. I know how they could materialize. I'm voluntarily doing this. I affirm that I'm healthy enough, and that if something happens to me, I legally I'm not allowed to hold you responsible. And those are the 6 elements to a waiver of liability. So I see some questions came in through the chat, so I'm just going to address them. Okay, Natasha wants the recording afterwards. I'm at work and unable to listen. Okay, thanks for addressing this important issue. We got your back, Natasha. Lorraine responded. Okay, Vic says, what about YouTube classes on demand where a waiver cannot be taken? So YouTube and social media like Instagram lives are sort of the same in the sense where you can't control who is viewing it, and you're unable to control that. So for YouTube, we have something that we've made at Conscious Counsel called a YouTube disclaimer, which basically it's a text in the body of the video that says, hey, this is what we're doing, and these are my qualifications, and only do it if you're certified, and this, that, or the other, like all the things that need to be required. And that's also the same with like the privacy policy and the social media disclaimer. If you run Instagram lives, you're not able to control who is viewing your content, but you are able to put a link on some of your materials to say, hey, any information that is done through this account, you do so at your own risk, and blah, 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 and all of the legal stuff, because the gold standard always is a signed binding legal agreement. And if you're not able to get that, then the second thing could be something unilateral, like terms of service on a website or a social media disclaimer. And Vic Bailey has given us a thumbs up, which is a good sign. So I'll just open it up to anyone else. Any questions about the waiver of liability stuff? Anything unclear? Anything that anyone wants to go over? How are we doing? Are we doing well? If you're having fun, go into the chat and write the word fun, because I'm having fun. So I'm unable to share example waivers because a waivers of liability is the document that it's a service that we sell. So unfortunately I can't, but I'm happy to share all of that information. Yeli has a question and everyone's having fun. So this is so good.
Hi.
Hey Yeli, where are you?
I am in Florida, in United States.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. I think everything you have said, it helps a lot because it's reassurance of what I have been working on my business. I mean, as soon as the pandemic hit and everything was going online, I used to be an attorney before I became a yoga teacher. So I kind of know about the legal responsibilities. And I just think that this type of law that you're doing, it's pretty cool and pretty amazing. So thank you for sharing all the valuable tips. So so I have set up my business and I took care of the legal aspects, but now I have a question that recently was kind of something I never thought about it. And I kind of use some of the legal documents I have kind of draft a little bit, but I want to know your input when it comes to hosting a retreat. So when I've been hosting retreats in the past year, when the students go through the processing of registering and all the stuff that they have to fill out some kind of survey about, if they're coming with somebody, they have any, somebody told me to not ask about food allergies because if I asked, I was kind of responsible for, but during that form that they have to fill out, I kind of added a legal document for services. It's quite long and they have to read it and they have to say either they agree or not to the terms in there. And on top of that, I add some kind of like a COVID terms in there, like, that they are healthy, that as far as they know, they are not contagious and all that stuff. So that's one side, the relationship with you and the student. And the other one that it came up lately is if you're co-hosting a retreat, that relationship with you and your co-host, I couldn't find any legal advice about that, but I still managed to pull something together and she was cool about signing the agreement. But what are your thoughts about that?
I've got a lot of thoughts about it. We work with retreat facilitators and organizers, and typically we have a retreat packet documents, which would be a retreat waiver, a retreat participant agreement, and then like a co-hosting for retreats. And retreats have been, it's a massive industry and it's a big part. And I can explain a little bit about why it's so important. So first and foremost, remember when I was talking about waivers and I was talking about activities? A waiver, you need a different retreat for a waiver because the activities you're doing on a retreat are different. And like this first happened for us when someone slipped and fell on a hike on a retreat and the person was using a yoga waiver. They're like, oh, well, it's a yoga retreat, so I get them to sign a yoga waiver, but it didn't say anything about hiking. And so remember, when you're at law, when you're facilitating an activity, you are responsible to make sure that the person doesn't get injured. They can release you, and you used to be a lawyer, so you know this, they can release you from liability so long as you've clearly communicated that. So what you need for retreats is, on a waiver perspective, is you need to make sure that you are specifically outlining all of the things, including eating certain foods and the possibility of allergies. It's a whole other thing that's really, really big. In terms of the retreat participant agreement, that's really, really important because the cool thing that I've learned as a lawyer in this industry is like, we're constantly getting better because we go through experience with clients where we learn what sort of issues and mistakes can come up. So around retreat participation, there were a lot of problems around cancellation, COVID tests, vaccines, substitutions, or like even as an organizer, like the venue canceled, or these, like you want an agreement that lets people know exactly, like coming back to the first thing I said, communicate expectations openly and honestly. Like, this is what you're getting into. This is the, after this date, you get 50% back. After this date, you get 20% back. After this date, you get nothing back. If someone else wants to take your spot, this is how it works. And it's just like, you put all of it down there as like, because remember, and this should also be written down, and I should have said this at the start, but like, you always want to reverse engineer these relationships so that you think like, okay, what's something that could go wrong? Someone's coming on a retreat. Okay, they have to cancel, or they want a refund, or this or that, or they're not happy, or they have an allergy, or this, that, or the other. And so long as the agreement communicates that openly and honestly, then you're mitigating the possibility of problems and issues as best as possible. And then 100% for co-hosting a retreat. It's the same with like, if you have a studio and you have workshops, right? Like an agreement we always sell are like co-host, like workshop co-hosting. So it's like, okay, well, who's responsible for the marketing, and what's the split of revenue, and when are the payments going to be made, and when is it sent from this account to the other account? So it's like, it's deep. It's deep. Like all of these are issues, and I've been through all of these with different clients that we have, and I hope that information's helpful. And like one other tip that I'll just include as well that we learned from another client, you want to make sure in the retreat participant agreement, you have something around mandatory travel insurance. And that's an example. Remember when I was speaking with Carrie, it's two parties can agree to anything that's not illegal. So for you as a retreat organizer, it makes everything easier if someone has mandatory insurance. And as a side note, Carrie, even for your contractors online, you want to make sure that they have yoga insurance so that if something goes wrong, they also are an additional buffer to what you have. But like those are just things that like we've picked up along the way that are really, really helpful, that make a big difference. Because if someone has to cancel and they got travel insurance and they booked this retreat, like there are other ways to make sure that whatever problems are happening are not as great. Does that answer your question? I know it's a little bit long-winded.
No, you did fantastic. And I have a very quick question. And I can send you an email later if that's better. But if I were interested in for you to review or redraft or triple check that I'm covering all the corners, do you rather work with your own templates, or if I give you everything I do, you kind of like make it better, enhance? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity. So I'm going to put two things in our chat where everyone is writing how much fun they're having, and myself included. So one is I put a link to my calendar there, and so one thing that I do for community partners and on chats like this, I'm always happy to offer free 10-minute consultations. I don't charge any money for them. And I do that, because I love what I do and I want to help So I'm happy to chat with anyone. Other lawyers, you know, they charge like $300 for 6 minutes, but I'm happy to connect with everyone and chat, because the one thing I know is that everyone who's on this call is making the world a healthier and more conscious place by virtue of, facilitating yoga for other people. So I think that's really rad. So I've put my link there. If anything that I've shared, if you're interested in working together or want to learn more, you can book a call. And then I'm going to talk about answering the agreements, but also I wrote, and this would be helpful. I wrote a book called the Yoga Law Book, a really creative title. I was like, why not call it the Yoga Law Book? So I put a link to that in the chat as well. And like, if any of this information to you seemed interesting and you want to know more, the book has all of these stories that I went through with my clients and is a really great foundation. And I just left. Hey, I'm back. Sometimes it's just like, when bands do an encore, I could hear you guys clapping and you're like, come back, Cory, we want more legal info. So sometimes I just have to do that. It's part of our shtick. I was, okay, so then lastly, in terms of reviewing agreements, I don't do that anymore. I did it in the first couple of years of my practice, but it ends up I spend more time reviewing it and editing and tightening it up, because other lawyers out there aren't yoga specific. So we prefer to just sort of start from scratch. Paolo, I know you had a question and I want to get to it about jurisdictions, because it's a really good one, especially because we have people from all over. So there are specific nuances which are different on a country to country basis. For sure there are, and there's different rules. The thing to know is all of our agreements and everything that we draft is based on best legal practices and best industry practices. So remember the first thing I said, where it's like communicating openly and honestly will really help you circumvent 90, and when I say 99.9, I mean 99.9. Communicating openly and honestly will help you circumvent 99.9% of the problems, because the problem can be resolved internally when a document addresses it. But if there is, and then in addition to that, because we know the type of businesses that yoga professionals operate with, and like the nuances of a retreat and the nuances of an online studio and all of that, all of our documents are prepared specifically for yoga. And also we choose the specific areas that we choose to operate within are not like jurisdictional heavy. Like obviously I don't do anything around transactions or real estate or wills and estates or anything like that. Usually it's just a general corporate, a general legal agreement between two parties of like, hey, you're paying £50 a month for a yoga subscription. This is what's included. If you want a refund, this is what cancellations like, all that sort of stuff. So to answer your question, yes, of course, there are nuances on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. What we've found to be most successful, and like we've got clients in more than 15 countries. What we find to be most helpful and beneficial are documents at best legal standards, like general legal principles, and then also best professional industry standards for yoga professionals. And I hope that answers your question, Paolo. Cool. Does anyone have any other questions before I bring this in for a landing? Operating online, service agreement, anything there? Okay, so I guess I'll just spend the last little bit here. I can just explain a little bit about operating online and privacy policies in terms of service and disclaimers. And just really quickly, remember how we talked about at the beginning, we went through the different relationships that we have. So, and this is one that I didn't include when we went through it. So we've got our students, we've got teachers, we've got all of that sort of stuff. And the one thing that I didn't include is people who visit our website or our social medias. And I spoke a little bit about it when I mentioned social media disclaimers. But basically, we also have these invisible relationships where we have a website where people come to visit us and we don't know what they're doing. And usually we have a mailing list or we process payments through a third-party processor. And so privacy is becoming more and more of an issue, and having an appropriate privacy policy matters more now than it ever has before. Where we see this come up, I don't know if you guys know this, it's like 45% of businesses that have cyber attacks are like small businesses, or like micro businesses are the ones with cyber attacks. So having a privacy policy is very helpful for that. If you have a mailing list, obviously like being up with GDPR or privacy laws is really important. But the other thing that we see where privacy laws are so important is just when it relates to using third-party processors. So if you use Stripe, if you use any other processor to collect payments like PayPal, whatever it is, at law, you have to include that information in your privacy policy. I don't know if you guys know, but there's a cure to insomnia. Have you guys heard about this? Does anyone have trouble sleeping? So all you have to do, you have to just open a privacy policy and read it. You start reading the privacy policy, and I promise you're going to fall asleep. So whenever we talk about privacy policy with clients, I'll usually be like, cool, like, you don't actually have to read it. Just give us the information that we ask you for and we'll prepare it for you, because it's so long and there's so much compliance to it. But privacy is a really important thing as well. Okay, cool. And then this is going to be the last question. Victoria, disclaimer and waiver, what's the difference? Great. A waiver is a legally binding signed agreement where someone promises not to hold you responsible. Waiver of liability, signed binding agreement, someone legally forfeits their right to sue you. A disclaimer is unilateral, and it's something that you post on YouTube, or it's something that you put on the bottom of your website that basically says you agree that by participating in this in this class or in this yoga class or whatever it is, that you will not hold me responsible. It's sort of like the waiver at the Olympics would be the gold medal, and the disclaimer, if you could choose a medal that came after bronze, the disclaimer would be the one after bronze. And maybe they'll come up with that medal one day or not. But a disclaimer is much weaker because it's not legally binding. Remember, just to bring it all full circle, like the story that I shared, it's all about how you can respond to a complaint. When a problem comes up, how are you able to respond? And so when you can respond with the gold standard, then you don't have to invest more money. You don't have to be more stressed. You can deal with it right away, as opposed to if someone got hurt and you're going to rely on a unilateral disclaimer, you're going to say, okay, well, I never agreed to that, and I don't care what you post. It's not legally binding, so I still have my position. So Lorena, I'm happy to pass it over to you. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share this. I had so much fun. What a cool international group. And I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you, Cory. That was really fun. I can imagine that your head is pretty full right now with all the information, and that you also need some time. No worries, though. We will send you an email with the record of the webinar so that you can still take your notes and everything and can process also what you've learned. And I also do hope that you will be able to implement these learnings in your general terms and the liability waiver that we just featured. And yeah, I just want to thank you all for coming, for joining, for participating and asking so many questions. I really appreciated having you here, and thank you from the Wool Momoyoga team. Thank you again, and talk to you soon.
Ciao. Bye, guys. Have a great day.